fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And it is officially the month of August.
August.
Oh.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah. I don't hate it. I like it.
I don't hate it.
No, I like it. So obviously, new month, new theme. Yay! Love that, because we'd get bored otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, I would get bored. If we only talked about fantasy, you'd be fine.
I'd be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This can't only be a fantasy podcast for me, because while I love it, I just don't think it could be the only thing that I talk about.
I feel like even for me, like after like a year of episodes,
you'd be like, okay.
I don't know what to talk about anymore.
Yeah. Eventually, like you, no matter how much you're reading, you run out of ideas at some point.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, for the month of August, we went kind of in a direction we've never really gone in completely before. Like we all know, we've touched on a lot of YA stuff, but we decided to, for the month of August, talk about children's lit. And just as like a caveat, so in case anybody's like, man, that's not really what you guys are talking about. In my definition of it, yes, it's like children's lit, so like, like young children, but also like middle grade kind of. I'm thinking of
things more what we're gonna lean towards.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like, the things that you read up until you were about 12, like until you like finished elementary school and moved into high school. The things that were like a little bit less,
like ages 9 to 12 or like 8 to 12.
Yeah, that's it. And sometimes like, a little bit younger than that. But yeah, we're definitely kicking things off in like the middle grade range. So I want to make that clear, so nobody's like, this isn't children's lit. Shut up. We know.
No.
Yeah. Fuck you. It's our podcast and we can do whatever we want. Exactly. So we're kicking things off by talking about a late 90s and early aughts kind of classic, honestly, which I completely forgot was Disney, by the way. Like, it just like,
oh, did you?
12 feet over my head. I didn't even realize it at the time, I don't think. So this week we are talking about the 2003 adaptation of Holes, which was published by, Louis Saker or Sacker?
I always thought it was Louis Sacker.
It could be Louis Sacker.
But I could be wrong.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it anyway. Let's just say Louis Sacker. Let's go with your pronunciation, from his novel that was written and published in 1998.
Mm-hmm. Quite a short, 98 to 2003.
Yeah,
like
a really
years.
short lifespan. The ones that really weird me out now are the ones where like the book is not published, but we've already got a movie in the works, and I'm like, huh?
I mean, to be fair, I only know of one of those, which is the new Hunger Games coming out.
Yeah, but it's happened before as well.
Oh, has it?
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's happened a couple of times that I've seen that over the years, and I've been like, but you, okay. It's like, oh, rights are already secured, and I've like known about something, and I'm like, that book's not even out yet. How is this possible?
Wow.
I know. Here we are. Anyway.
What it must be like to be one of those authors.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So we're kicking it off with that, and we're just going to get, I think, very nostalgic this whole month.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. Just jumping into, that's it, like everything that we read growing up. So it's going to be a lot of stuff for people who are like a lot younger, a lot older than us. They're going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
But for you millennials out there, you'll all be like,
you're going to be like,
yes.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yes, I remember those. So we're kicking things off by talking about Holes, which like, I think that the book, I guess because it was published in 1998, it probably started to like fall into like English class curriculums maybe within a couple of years after that.
Yeah.
So by the time that the movie was made, I'm sure there were like a few people who had actually read it in school, and also people who had, obviously just read it for pleasure themselves as well. So Holes currently has a rating of 7 out of 10 on IMDb and 78% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I would have given it more.
Yeah, I think I'd give it a little bit higher. I mean, like, maybe it's also, again, like the nostalgia factor kind of makes it so that you can't help but rate things a little bit higher, possibly, than you would in under other circumstances.
Maybe,
but honestly,
like the acting was really good, and the story is good. Like,
yeah, well, so we just rewatched this movie before we sat down, and I haven't watched it in like 7 or 8 years at least. Like, it's been quite a while since I've watched it, and we watched it again, and I was like, no, this movie really holds up.
It really does,
and
it explores themes that were like novel for the time. I think. Yeah.
And the older that I get, the more I notice more of those themes, I guess. Like, as I like rewatch it, I'm like, oh yeah, wow, they really were tackling some issues that maybe we weren't talking about quite as much in the early 2000s on a regular basis, or like with a mainstream audience.
Right. Like, we weren't putting a spotlight on these things.
Not quite as much as we should have been, no.
And this book and movie, because the two are very well done, like the movie is very well adapted from the book, but it shines a spotlight on these, circumstances, situations, issues, without making it like hey, we're
too
like
preachy, I guess.
Yeah, like too preachy. Yeah, I think that's a good way of
or
putting
too
it.
in your face to a degree, which I think
Exactly.
unfortunately we have a little bit of a tendency to slide into that sort of hole now. Well, no pun intended. Where we can't help ourselves, where it's kind of like we have to keep in mind all of these things that we should be paying attention to, and we should, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it makes it so that certain characters in screenplays wind up with this kind of attitude that you're like, this is unreasonable for like a human being. Like, we talked about this like number of weeks ago. There we were talking about YA thrillers, and we talked about There's Someone Inside Your House, and there's a character in that film who is the character that's supposed to point out all of the injustices, but that's like her only role as a character, and it's stupid because she's meant to be a teenage girl, and there's no way that the teenage girl would just be like this all of the time. Right. Like no 16-year-old would be acting like this or just spending all of her time pointing out injustices.
It's true. Oh, yes. Okay, yeah. I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. Let me dig in the brain
it was
that.
A character that you had pointed out halfway through the movie. I think you were like, this is just annoying. Like, this girl wouldn't be speaking like this. Yeah, she'd be pointing out certain things, but she'd be doing it in a much more blasé way.
She would. Yeah. And it's possible. Like, look, I'm not an expert on Gen Z. Like, y'all might be yelling at me saying, like, yes, we would.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. Look, maybe. I don't know.
But, like, at the same time, like, we also have to remember that, like, teenagers are teenagers. Yeah. And, like, all of us were, a little self-absorbed to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. And things happening in our own lives were like very important to us, so how much you're going to be the one person, kind of standing on the soapbox all the time.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Overview kind of, I guess, of Holes. So there's a lot of hopping back and forth that the story does, in the sense that it jumps back and forth in time to explain certain parts. And in the film, it's very easy to follow, obviously. It's just that when you're explaining it, you're kind of like, how do I talk about this?
So, in a linear fashion.
Sort of, yeah. So
there's like 4 different stories going on.
Exactly. Yeah. Primarily the story follows a character by the name of Stanley Yelnats the Fourth.
And yes, his name is spelled the same.
Stanley, and then Yelnats is Stanley spelled backwards, which is like a cute little thing, obviously. Yeah. So Stanley is from a lower class family. Where are they? Where is he located?
It's a big city.
Near a big city, I think. Green Lake, Texas. Sorry.
Oh, Texas. Okay.
Yeah, they've been cursed to be unlucky. So, okay, this is the whole backstory for them. So just as a sidebar, Stanley lives with his mother, father, and grandfather.
And he and his grandfather share a room.
Yes, and so basically you've got Stanley Yelnats the second, third, and fourth all living together. So there's a grandfather, father, and him. They're in a tiny apartment. His dad is an inventor, and for several years he has been trying to perfect a product that will eliminate odor in shoes.
It's so specific. Like, I remember reading this book as a kid and being like, yeah, okay, that's a job, I guess.
Yeah,
like, it kind of, like, goes over your head, but, like, the older I get, it's like, that is so specific.
I think it's because we went through a period in the 90s and early 2000s where all we had were things like this and, like, flubber, and you're like, yeah, a random inventor is definitely a job that will pay you money somehow.
There was so much to do with inventing things. There was, like, Wallace and Gromit.
Yeah, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, like... all of those things, yeah.
Like, reading the book, you're like, yeah, an inventor.
We went through a quirky scientist dad phase for some reason. All the dads were nice, but they were, like, quirky and silly.
Inventors.
And they were trying to invent things that were, like, often also very quirky and like, very niche. Specific. Yeah, like, very, very specific. So their family, essentially, what they believe is that their family is cursed to have bad luck forever. So the grandfather tells a story about the fact that this is all because of his, no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather, I think, is what it is.
Yeah, good for nothing or something, yeah.
Stanley Yelnats the First, who lived in the town, generations ago, and fell in love with a young woman.
Well, no, it wasn't Stanley Yelnats the First. It was Elia.
Oh, sorry.
Yelnats.
I'm sorry. You're correct.
So
that's true.
I don't even know if it was Stanley's the First's father or his grandfather, but it was like generations before, where he was, he fell in love with this young girl, and he went to her father and said, I want to marry your daughter.
Yeah.
And the father said, you need to bring me the biggest pig.
Yeah, because she's already got this other one, this gross guy here who's interested in her, and he has a big pig.
He's offered me a really big pig. Yeah. So if you can offer me a bigger pig, then you can have her. And so he goes and he sees Madame Zeroni.
She's like an old gypsy woman.
Yeah. And he says, I need your help to get this pig like the biggest possible. And she says, fine, I'll do this for you. But once you win her over, or like once you kind of go through with this, you need to come back and you need to carry me up the mountain so that I can drink from like this spring.
Magic spring.
And get strong again. Yeah, like get strong again.
Yes.
And you have to sing a song as you do it.
Oh, yes. What is it? If only
the woodpecker cries, the bark on the tree is as soft as the sky.
What is it? While the moon beats below, hungry and lonely, he cries to there. While the wolf beats below, hungry and lonely, he cries to the moon. If only. It's something like that.
Yeah,
I forget.
And so she says that to him. So he says yes. So he gets his big pig. He goes back, and the man whose daughter is up for sale apparently weighs both of these pigs and says they're both exactly the same. Yeah. So he says, okay,
you
daughter,
pick which one you want.
And she can't because she's an idiot.
Stupid. She's such a twit. This character's like really dumb.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing, is that he's head over heels with her because she's beautiful, but she's dumb as a post. Like she has no idea what anything is and doesn't realize, like, this young, good-looking guy who's completely besotted with her, or this like gross old fat guy who's
so
like, ugh, disgusting. Yeah. And he's like, okay, well, you choose which one you want to marry, and she's like, oh, I don't know. They're Jewish. I'm sorry. They're like very
Eastern European
Jewish, I think, from like many generations back. But yeah, Elia is so upset by this because he's like, oh, she doesn't even love me. Yeah. But he's like, keep the pig. I don't even fucking care. And he leaves town, but unfortunately
forgets to bring Madame Zeroni up the mountain. And so she puts a curse on his whole family.
And she says, if you don't, then you and your family will be cursed forever and all eternity.
Yep.
And so their curse, they feel, is that they're always unlucky with everything. The men in the family never achieve anything that they want to achieve. So like his father's been an inventor this entire time, and he's never been able to get anywhere with it. Mm-hmm. So Stanley's walking home, and a pair of shoes essentially comes flinging out of the sky and hits him in the head, and he picks them up, and they stink.
And so he's like, well, I'm going to bring these home because they could be a good luck charm. Like, they've come out of the sky. Yeah. I'm going to bring them home. And I think that's what he says in the book. Like, he sees them as, like, potentially a good luck charm.
Yeah.
And so he wants to take them home so his dad can experiment on them. But lo and behold, the police show up.
The police show up, and they're like, you stole these shoes. And he's like, I don't even know whose shoes they are.
Yeah.
And it turns out they were cleats that belonged to a very, very famous baseball player who's nicknamed Sweet Feet.
Yeah, and he had given them up for charity.
Yes.
And so the whole thing is like, how can you be such a horrible person that you stole from charity, from these poor orphans?
From these orphans.
Yeah.
And, because you're not an orphan, like, how dare you do something like that? But he's like, okay, but I didn't, though.
I didn't. I had no idea.
No, but unfortunately, since Stanley's family is so poor as well, and they're struggling a lot, they're not able to afford a lawyer. So there's really nothing they can do to push back against this.
Yeah.
And so because of that, rather than go to prison, which is apparently an option, I'm like, it's one pair of shoes.
Oh,
but
yes,
okay.
But for 18 months, he gets the choice between going to prison or going to camp.
Camp Green Lake, they call it, which is like a juvenile facility for delinquents, which this is so interesting to rewatch this film now that we're getting like a lot of documentaries and stuff out about like the behavioral camps from like the 80s through the early 2000s and stuff. Like we're seeing a lot of those things, and a lot of those people who had to go through those camps who would be taken out of their beds at 1:00 in the morning, dragged to these places, forced to go on these really insane hikes with barely any food or water. People were dehydrated. People wound up in hospital. A couple of people wound up dead in some cases. I've watched like some stories about these and these alleged like behavioral camps for people who would choose to send their children there, who apparently were, terrible kids essentially. And it just, God, it's just awful what these kids experience, and just all of this.
These things, man.
It's just insane, and it's so funny to rewatch this film because the whole point of this alleged camp for kids is that they send them out essentially into the middle of the desert, and each day they make them dig a big hole 5 feet by 5 feet, like it's like the length of their shovel.
Yeah.
They're meant to do this, and all it's supposed to do, supposedly, is build character.
You take a bad boy, make him dig a hole once a day, he turns into a good boy.
Yeah, that's some flawed logic.
Yeah.
I'd really like to understand where that comes from, that we're like, oh yes, forced manual labor will make this kid want to do anything to improve themselves at all.
And like in the beating hot desert, basically.
Yeah, with, only a little bit of limited water for the day, and
one shower, cold shower, and like
cold shower a day, shitty food.
Super early, and like surrounded by other juvenile delinquents, so you can imagine the dynamics. And I think they're all boys at the camp.
They are. I believe it's an all boys camp. I don't think that there's like a mix going on. So, and anyway, it is a very interesting thing to on rewatch. I feel like when we were kids and we watched this, we were like, holy shit, this is crazy. But now I'm like, oh god, these places have existed essentially.
Well, I think it's really interesting to rewatch these things as an adult, because it's, you kind of look back, and I had read the book before I saw the movie, and I really loved the book, and I remember like just taking all this information for granted, just being like, yeah, okay, like, oh, that's a thing for the story.
Yeah.
I mean?
I guess that that's something that they needed to do for the story, but it's true that you don't pick up on the nuance as much, which is normal.
Right.
Yeah. So.
But, like, Stanley decides to go to camp because his rationale is, well, I've never been to camp before.
And he's like, what sounds better than prison, obviously.
I mean, he's being presented with this option to essentially go to a summer camp.
Yeah.
And so he's like, well, okay, I'll do that then. Isn't Camp Green Lake what they call... Isn't Friday the 13th?
Camp Crystal Lake.
Oh, right, okay.
Very close, though. There's always a lake. And I mean, of course, obviously the irony in this place is that it's called Green Lake because the town was called that, but the lake that existed there dried up years and years and years ago, and now it's just essentially desert. Anyway, Stanley gets there. Obviously, there's much of a dynamic that exists with the other kids who are there. Because, some of them are there for probably slightly better reasons than I stole a pair of shoes.
I mean, I think most of them have, like, petty crimes.
Yeah, it's like minor infractions.
They stole something. Or, like, wrong place at the wrong time or something. I think most of them are shoplifters or something.
I'm pretty sure most of them, I think they make it sound like most of them have stolen something at some point. So he gets there, of course, like, has to readjust to all of this, and then realizes also very quickly that this place is terrible. Mm-hmm. The dynamics, I think one of our favorite things, especially rewatching it, is the dynamics between the people who are running the camp.
Fantastic.
Yeah, particularly the first people that you are introduced to are a character played by John Voight called Mr. Sir, who's, I don't even know what his job is.
He's I don't know, he's like...
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say he's the warden, but he's not the warden. He's
not the warden, though.
He's like the enforcer? I don't know.
Yeah,
he's the manager?
I'm not really sure what his actual title is. I don't know if it's like indicated anywhere, like what he's supposed to do.
Works there. And
apparently he's just like he's the assistant warden, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then Dr. Pendanski.
Doctor with big old quotation marks.
Who's a counselor.
Yes.
And they all have nicknames. So
all the kids have nicknames.
All the kid, but they also call Dr. Pendanski Mom.
Mom, yeah,
because he's the counselor.
Yes, right.
So,
but he's I think like particularly from an adult perspective, you can tell immediately. You're like, this man does not have a medical degree.
I'm sure that man never went to medical school.
No.
But like also, I said this to you when we were watching it. I would argue that he is literally the worst one out of all of them.
He's pretty fucking terrible. It's true because he does try to do a thing where he presents himself in a way where like I'm helping you guys or I'm doing something, but then he turns right around and says something completely atrocious.
Total piece of shit.
Yeah. All of the kids have nicknames based on like little either an incident or quirks or whatever,
or the reason why they're in there in the first place. Yeah. So you've got like X-Ray, who's kind of like arguably the main, like the big cheese there. I think because he's been there the longest.
Yeah, he's like if I think of like Hook, he's like Rufio.
Right. And it's because he's got big glasses.
Yes.
And he needs his glasses to see. You've got like Armpit, who like
he stinks
basically. His real name's Theodore. You've got Zigzag, who's just kind of like a little zany.
Well, I don't know. We were watching it, and like the more I watched it, I was like, this character reads a little bit neurodivergent to me, like definitely. Some sort of something or other.
And then you've got Zero, who they say that he doesn't say anything, he doesn't talk, and he's got nothing between the ears.
Yeah,
so
and they say
Zero.
it's because he's stupid, not because he's just trying not to talk to anyone and just get through what he needs to get through.
Yeah, they kind of act like he can't talk.
Yeah, they
because
do.
He's so stupid.
Yeah.
And then the new character, Stanley Yelnats, or Barf Bag, was the one that Stanley is replacing.
Yeah, because the cold open of the film shows a kid,
that's right.
this like Barf Bag kid, whatever, who was, because of the conditions that they're being put in all the time, he's so desperate to get away from the camp that he sees a rattlesnake one day, climbs out of his hole, takes off his shoe, and allows the rattlesnake to bite him so that he can go to the fucking hospital and not have to be there anymore.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And that's the cold open, and when Stanley gets to the camp, they give him a canteen that said Barf Bag on it, and all they do is cross out the name.
And they just put a new name
on it. So they name him Caveman, because they say, you look like you live in a cave, man.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And they're just like, this guy belongs in a cave, and he finds a little fossil one day while he's digging of like fish, and they're all like, oh, this guy like belongs in a cave, so they start calling him Caveman. Whatever.
Yeah.
They all have like little handles.
Yeah. And so, that's kind of the dynamic going on. Nobody's, super friendly, I would say.
Not really.
They just kind of all put up with each other because, at the end of the day, they all wake up super early every day. I think it's 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
They get up and they go and dig a hole. And it's 5 by 5. And they are expected to...
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
They're expected to dig 1 hole per day.
Yeah.
And then they kind of have their afternoons free, once they're finished digging their hole. So the faster you dig your hole, the faster you can get out of there. You can be done
for the rest of the day, yeah.
I was going to say something else that was an important detail there, but I've forgotten.
It's fine. We'll circle back if you remember what it was. It's okay. So Stanley is obviously the character who is most often questioning things for the audience as well. Obviously, to be like, okay, but why are we digging holes? And then he's Mr. Sir is telling him to let them know if he finds anything interesting, and if he does, if the warden thinks it's interesting, he gets the day off. And his thing is like, okay, well, what's interesting? They're like, what constitutes interesting? Right. What are you looking for? And he's like, oh, well, we're not looking for anything. Don't go thinking we're looking for anything. You're digging holes to build character.
Yeah, and Stanley is arguably the one who's asking the most questions. He's looking around, he's trying to understand what the hell's going on, what the dynamic is. Yeah. And they keep talking about this warden that they've never seen, Stanley's never seen at this point. And it's the warden. They use it as a fear tactic, Yeah. So we know that there is a warden.
We just don't know who they are.
We don't know who they are, and we know that they're digging to find something interesting.
Yeah. But we don't know what constitutes interesting per se.
Exactly.
So, we get a little bit of the dynamic of that. They start digging, everybody starts, working together and kind of putting up with one another. And one day, Stanley finds something that looks like a metal casing of some sort. It almost looks like a bullet casing, essentially, a very large. Says, right? Yeah, he's like, "Is this a bullet?" Yeah. But it's got the initials KB carved on it
in a heart.
Yeah, in a heart, and you're like, what the fuck is that? And so that's found anyway. X-Ray takes it, and there's a whole thing there where he's like, I've been here the longest. I deserve to get a day off, so I'm taking this, and I'm gonna say that I'm the one who found it. Blah blah blah. And then they call the warden, who we're introduced to. She's played by Sigourney Weaver. Her name is Louise
awesome.
Walker, I believe.
Yeah.
She's great. She's great.
So good in this movie.
She's great at this character. Anyway, who then gets very excited, and again, we're like, why would she be excited about essentially what looks like a bullet casing with initials carved on it? What does this mean, right? And she starts, saying okay, we're gonna dig tunnels. Now we're digging in this entire area where you found this bullet casing, and it takes a little while for Stanley to come to the realization that he's like, I don't think that this was a bullet. I think it's a lipstick tube.
Yeah.
Because he's been told, they've all been, the whole area anyway, still speaks about this legend of an outlaw named Kissin' Kate Barlow. Apparently the men that she killed, she would leave a lip print, a lipstick print on their faces after she killed them.
Right.
And it's only the ones that she killed that she would kiss, and so that became her handle, essentially.
And so to find her lipstick too would be quite what's the word I'm looking for? like, obviously the warden would get really excited because, like, that's something interesting.
It's significant.
It's significant. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes, it would be. I'm sorry. Baby brain people.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing children's
That's why
literature.
we're doing children's lit this month, is because we're reminding ourselves of all the great things that we're going to get to give my niece when she comes along.
Surprise! So I'm going to be a little slow over the next little while.
Yeah,
here.
we'll see how it's fine. We'll be fine. We're not worried. We'll be fine. Yeah, so... But we don't, like, okay, so we know that, like, this is interesting. And, yeah, it would be very interesting to find the lipstick tube of a very famous former outlaw.
Well, if her calling card was to leave lipstick.
Yeah, lipstick prints on the people that she killed. But you're also kind of like, okay, but, like, what really, like, why is that so exciting? What really does that mean? And so what we get to have interspersed with what's going on in the present is the past of Green Lake back when it was still a lake. In the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, when it was still a lake, and there was an entire town around there. It wasn't just desert. It wasn't just nothing. And the Walker family, so the warden's ancestor, her grandfather, and his father before him, they owned basically the entire town.
Yeah.
Now, within this town, there was a young woman who was a teacher named Catherine. She taught at the primary school that they had there. She would teach the kids. And the other player involved in this, his name was Sam. He was an onion farmer who would climb up to the mountains outside of the town. He had a big onion field up there, and he would sell them. He would make products out of them and, like, sell them to the townsfolk and stuff like that. He's, like, a bit of a handyman. He would do stuff around town, you know, whatever.
All around nice guy.
All around, like, that's it. Like, nice guy, just a person who was, like, you know, working and trying to make a living off of the town as well.
Right.
And he and Catherine have, like, a barter system for a little while where, you know, he's like, okay, well, I'll help you deal with some repairs in the primary school that are, you know, sort of coming up, like a leaky roof and some door shingles that don't, like, you know, that aren't, like, working properly. Like, we can't open the windows because the windows are stuck and they won't open, and the door is kind of hanging off on one side, you know.
It's very downtrodden.
Very downtrodden school. Yeah, that's it. Well, I mean, it's pretty clear based on the actions of the men in the town, the white men in the town, by the way, that
education is not an
education
uno in
no
the importance list.
Education is not really something that they're spending their money on. Surprise. So Sam starts helping to repair all of that, and in exchange, he asks Miss Catherine if she can give him some of her jars of spiced peaches, because she, like, cans her stuff, I guess, and makes, I guess, probably really good spiced peaches, I would assume. So.
Yeah.
So they have a barter system for a while, and he helps her, you know, with stuff around the school, and slowly but surely they start speaking to each other more and spending some time, and they fall in love, and it's really sweet.
But the men of the town don't think so.
Well, the men of the town, particularly Trout Walker, whose father basically owns the entire town, is none too pleased because he's tried to get Catherine interested in him for a while, and she thinks he's disgusting.
Because he is.
Yeah, and she thinks he's a piece of shit, so she's very politely like, no, thank you. Basically, she politely but firmly rebuffs him every time he tries anything.
Yep.
Until one evening, that's it, he stumbles upon her and Sam kissing in the school, and of course gets very incensed by this because he was rejected by her, and also, again, they don't really get too much into it in the book because it is a book for younger people.
And yet they still touch on these important subjects.
Which in this particular case, obviously, are aspects of classism and racism.
Yep.
The majority of the time, because I don't think I mentioned, but Sam's character is black. So,
yep.
Of course, the white men of the town are none too happy that he's, you know, according to them, anyway, basically, like, nabbed the prettiest girl in town.
Yep. And so they set the school on fire. And so she's very upset. She goes and runs to the sheriff, who is drunk.
Yeah.
And he says to her, give me a kiss. Ugh. You don't seem to mind kissing that other guy.
The onion picker.
And he said, I always get drunk before a hanging. And it was interesting because I was like, I wonder if that would have been like a lynching.
Yes, it would have been.
And so she's extremely upset. She runs off to try and find Sam,
who's on his way back across the lake because his onion fields were up in the mountains on the other side of Green Lake.
And she can't warn him in time, and I assume it's Trout who's gone out onto the lake.
It's Trout and a couple of the other guys.
Boat. and he shoots him.
And they've killed him, unfortunately, in his boat. Oh my god, and they killed his donkey, and that made me really sad.
That made you really sad.
Mary Lou.
Mary Lou the donkey.
Yeah, because he has her at the beginning. He says all she eats are his onions, and she's over 100 years old, and it's really sweet. But yeah, that's it, because he would like go back and forth with her to and from town.
Yep.
Yeah, so obviously, Catherine, after this happens, this obviously completely broke her heart, and she decided that she wasn't just going to take it lying down. And so essentially she took off and became a very famous outlaw in that area. She would rob people, and she would cause all kinds of chaos and things like that, so that this town, no one ever wanted to live there anymore. And so that, like New American Frontier, all that stuff, no one would want to be there because there was all this chaos happening all the time. And over time, as she does this, the lake dried up over years. It stopped raining in the area. There stopped being anything for the town to function on. I think most people left, probably.
She herself has stolen any bit of fortune that
anyone had, including...
She's robbed banks.
And including, she robbed Stanley's, great-grandfather?
Stanley Yelnats.
Great-great-grandfather. Yeah, so the original, original Stanley Yelnats.
Yeah.
She robbed him.
Yeah, and leaves him in the desert, basically.
Yes.
And so he's forced to kind of wander around aimlessly with no water, no nothing, delirious, until he finds refuge on God's thumb, which is the mountain that's shaped as a thumb.
Yeah.
So this becomes significant later on in the story.
But it's like one of those, like, remember it for later things.
Remember it for later.
Yeah.
So this is all being told kind of in the background of, like, this whole digging situation.
Yes.
And so, it's becoming increasingly obvious that they're looking for something. And so, based on all the characters we've just mentioned, like, obviously they're looking for Kate's fortune.
Yeah.
Because she has buried it somewhere on this lake.
On the lake that dried up. Yeah.
That dried up as a big F.U. to Trout Walker for killing Sam, who was the warden's granddaddy.
Yeah.
And so the warden has spent essentially her entire life digging.
Being forced by her grandfather, and then probably her father as well. And dig. Now herself to dig. And she's become so hyper-focused on this one goal of finding the fortune that the Walker family believes that they were robbed of by Kate Barlow. Because she, through obviously like the fights and everything that she would be part of, she's injured at some point, winds up back on the lake there, sitting on an overturned boat, which it turns out was actually Sam's boat. The Mary Lou, he called it after the donkey. Trout shows up, and she literally says to him, she's like, oh, well, the lake goes on for miles. You're never going to find any of it.
Your family will dig for it for 100 years, and you'll never
find it. And she essentially puts like a curse on them to a degree, and then she lets this very particular yellow spotted lizard bite her. Apparently they're very venomous, and they kill you almost immediately if they bite you.
But they were you could fend them off with Sam's magic onion
with his
potion.
onions. Yeah, he says he has one like throwaway line earlier on when he says yellow spotted lizards don't like my onion juice, and you're like, I feel like that won't mean anything, but it does. It does. It means something later. So that's kind of the entire legend, like a quite like tragic story overall of what happened between Kate and Sam, and how she went from Catherine to kissing Kate Barlow, and how she met her end, and then of course how Trout Walker never got over any of that, and then forced the generations after him to continue to do that work. Up until now. So now, obviously, the warden, Louise, she has, made it like her life's mission to find this treasure wherever she can. And so they use Camp Green Lake as a front in order for her to get free labor.
I hand it to her. It's pretty innovative.
It's pretty innovative. I will say,
entrepreneurial.
Yeah,
put it that way.
It's terrible, but you got to be a little bit impressed by it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
and so it just becomes increasingly obvious, like what a horrible person she is through different acts that she does, like with her poison nail polish. She like slaps Mr. Sir across the face with it for wasting her time at one point, and like things are just getting like really strained at Camp Green Lake after this digging situation with X-Ray's hole, because Stanley also agrees to help Zero read.
Learn to read.
Zero says that he'll dig half of Stanley's hole so that like they can finish faster and he can teach him how to read. And so the other boys obviously don't like this, and so it turns into to like, so you've got Mr. Sir who's getting pissy with Stanley. You've got, the warden who's angry because she thought she came so close. She thought they found something. And now all the boys are getting mad at Stanley because and Zero, because it's like, well, they have to dig their own holes. Like, why doesn't he have to dig his own hole? So they kind of call it out at one point, and Dr. Pendansky, Mom, kind of shows his true colors when he starts kind of bullying Zero and saying how stupid he is, and like, why are you bothering to teach him how to read, because he's too dumb, and all this. And so Zero smashes him across the face with a shovel, and he takes off. And the whole thing is that Zero was a very poor, from a poor background. When he was arrested, he was living on the streets. Yeah. And he was a warden of the state. So there was no family for him or whatnot. And so they're showing Mr. Sir, Dr. Pendansky, and the warden talking, saying, like, well, he's ran away. He's probably going to die. Yeah. Like, do we have to do anything? And they're like, well, no, he doesn't have any family. Like, no one's going to care about him. No, we'll just destroy his files and whatnot.
And pretend he was never here.
But Stanley overhears them, and he gets really mad. And so he realizes that if anybody's going to find Zero, it has to be him. Yeah. So, like, in the book, he spends, like, about 24 hours, like, mulling this over. Yeah. And he can't just leave it alone. And so he steals Mr. Sir's truck to try and take... Because he's like, well, if I can take the water truck and drive it out there...
Then we'll have water.
Yeah. But, of course, he drives it right into a hole.
Yeah. But I mean, keep in mind, he's also, like, he's supposed to be, like 12, maybe?
Well, that's it. Like, I mean, he's a kid trying to drive a truck. Yeah. So, fair enough. And so he decides at this point that he better just leg it off to Zero and try and convince him to, like, come back with him. And so he goes and he runs and he finds Zero hiding underneath a boat. A wooden boat.
Called the Mary Lou. Look at that.
And so, he finds Zero. Zero's alive. And we were laughing at this scene because, Stanley's like, Zero, we gotta go back. Like, we gotta figure it out. We gotta go back. And Zero's just not listening to him.
No,
he's like, no, I'm not going back.
No, because he immediately was like, no, I'm not going back. Because for him, it's like a different situation. Like, Stanley's family will come looking for him. But Zero doesn't have that because his mother had been stuck, like, working a ton of jobs. They were very, very poor. And she had, like, she would have to, like, leave him in parks during the day and stuff to go and try and get work. And one day, we don't really know why exactly, but she didn't come back.
Not in the time that she said she would. And so that was when he got picked up, I think
initially because he wound up in some orphanages and stuff like that.
A shelter or something.
Yeah, and what he explains to Stanley after, which he realized pretty quickly after Stanley had explained it to everyone at the beginning, why he wound up at the camp. Yeah. So it turns out that when those shoes that Stanley was accused of stealing were sitting at the orphanage, Zero was there, and he came across them, and he liked them, and he took them because he kind of thought he could. Mm-hmm. And then when he did, all of a sudden everybody was like, oh my God, the shoes are gone. So he kind of panicked and he ran off. And then
he threw them over and overpass.
And they hit Stanley on the head, which is why they looked like they fell from the sky. Mm-hmm. And then apparently basically the next day he got picked up for trying to steal shoes from a Payless.
Yeah, and I pointed out to Megan, like, the level of, like, nuance that you'd have to pick up on this, like, watching this later in life. Yeah. To be arrested as a minor for stealing a pair of shoes from Payless.
I know.
Where the shoes are worth like $10.
$10.
Like, and like, as Megan pointed out, there are college guys raping girls and getting away with it.
Yeah, and we're like, oh, that's fine. But it does, when you kind of pay more attention to it, it speaks to the dichotomy with regards to classism within the American justice system, and how even just having access, and racism, and even how just having access to an attorney, actually having access to an attorney suddenly gives you all of these privileges that a lot of people cannot afford because of the cost of all of them.
Yep. So, so that's how Zero ends up at the camp. So, Zero shows Stanley that he's found this stuff that he's calling sploosh.
Yeah, he's just named it sploosh.
In the boat.
In the overturned boat. And it turns out it's Kate's peaches.
Her spice peaches.
From like 100 years ago.
From like 100 years ago.
It's crazy. And they're still, like, they were canned, right? So they
Yeah.
were sealed. So strangely, they're still edible, it seems.
So they're kind of like surviving off this, and Stanley's like, Zero, we gotta get out of here, we gotta get out of here. And he looks over at the mountain, and he realizes that it looks like a thumb.
He's like, does that look like a thumb to you? And then he thinks back to his dad's story about finding refuge in God's thumb. And so they hoof it up the mountain, and they have a little bit of a hard time getting there. But when they get to the top, there is water at the top. There's a natural spring, and they find Sam's original onion fields from back in the day. And apparently the onions are very sweet, so they're kind of subsisting off of eating those for a while.
For a couple of days.
Yeah, a couple of days. And then they kind of make a decision, like, we literally cannot stay here forever, and we also have to stop everything from happening. And Stanley gets the idea. He's like, I think based on where I had originally found the tube of lipstick, I think I might have figured out roughly where we should be digging to find Kate Barlow's actual treasure that she buried.
But you missed a key part here.
What?
Stanley.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Carried Zero up the mountain and then sang his song when he got to the top.
Yeah,
and
so
if you recall, Madame Zeroni was the one who set the curse, and Zero's real name is Hector Zeroni.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned that before, but Zero does say, well, my name's not Zero, it's Hector Zeroni. And you're like, oh, okay. So, of course, he takes him up there to get water to get strong again.
Yeah.
And so, in doing so, he's kind of broken the Yelnats curse.
He finally fulfilled what his great good-for-nothing grandfather
Dirty,
did.
rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather never did before. Yeah, so they go... Anyway, so they go back down the mountain. They sneak back into camp overnight to go start digging to find the treasure. And lo and behold, they do. They're trying to dig a bigger hole, and they find this big chest that seems to have a whole bunch of treasure. And, of course, at the same time, the warden, Mr. Soren Pendensky, show up and are about to take them out of the hole. However, the chest is covered in those yellow-spotted lizards that are very poisonous. But because of Sam's earlier comment about the lizards don't like my onion juice, all they've been eating are onions, so they must smell like onions
so
a ton.
So the lizards do not want to bite them.
So the lizards crawl all over them, but they don't do anything.
No, they don't want to bite them. They're like, ugh, no.
Yuck, no thank you, I don't want the onion juice.
Yeah.
So they stay there essentially all the way until the morning while the adults are trying to figure out how they can get away with any of this.
Like, very vocally being like, well, nobody's going to care about Zero.
Should we shoot them?
Should we shoot them? Like, oh yeah, but Stanley has a family. We can't really do anything about that.
Oh,
like,
it's insane. And so because in the interim as well, the day prior to this, before they snuck back, because his dad, in the meanwhile, has actually... There were some peaches that accidentally fell into the pot he was working on that smell thing with to get rid of the shoe odor.
As soon as Stanley carries Zero up the mountain, this happens.
His dad is able to find and perfect his formula that completely neutralizes the odor in the shoes, and so they're able to, I think, get their shit sorted a little bit. And they also get a lawyer who has gone out to the camp to be like, hey, so we looked into it, and it turns out that no, Stanley really didn't steal these shoes. We've now figured this out, and so we want him back. But of course he was missing at this point, so the warden found a way to put her off a bit, even though she's the family lawyer. She's going to be pretty determined. She was like, yeah, I'm coming back.
Yep.
So, and the next day she comes back with the sheriff.
Oh yes. Oh, she does.
And several members
a
of
real sheriff.
Yeah, and several members of law enforcement with her.
Yeah.
And she's like, give me this fucking kid right now. But of course, when she shows up, they're still stuck in the hole for a bit there with the lizards, and there's a bit of back and forth that happens, and then Stanley, tries to defend himself, and Zero, he climbs out of the hole, and when he does so, Zero does the same with the chest, and when the warden tries to take it, Zero's like, no, this isn't yours, it's Stanley's. And she's like, what the hell are you talking about? No, it's not. And he's like, yes, it is. It has his name on it.
And if you recall, Kissing Kate Barlow robbed Stanley the first.
Yes.
Whatever he was carrying.
Apparently he made a ton of money in the stock market.
Oh,
that was his thing.
That was his thing. And so she used a chest that she stole off of him to stuff it full of
his
treasure.
stuff, but also everybody
a whole bunch
else's
of
stuff too. So it has Stanley's name on it, which means that it's essentially his property.
Well, because that was what the warden was saying, right? Like, she was like, oh yeah, he came, he snuck out in the middle of the night and he stole my property, and now he's sitting in this hole. Like, he's a thief. I can have him put back in the camp
here,
for
this
as
is
long
mine,
as
this
possible.
is mine. And Zero's the one who's like, no, it's not.
No, it's
Look, it
not.
says his name on it. So, yeah, so they get to...
And Pendansky's like, he can't read.
Oh my God,
Like,
it's like an asinine comment in the middle of this. So they're all brought back to the camp, and the lawyer's trying to be like, okay, Stanley, like, we gotta go. We gotta leave. Your parents are waiting for you. We have to go. And he's like, I'm literally not leaving without Zero. I will not leave without him.
And he knew, because he had overheard them talking about how to essentially erase Zero.
Yes.
He knew that they wouldn't be able to, like, give a file or anything about him. So he's like, no, I'm not leaving. And the lawyer's like, oh, like, get me his file.
She said, fine, somebody go get me his file.
And, like, the warden, who's completely, like, you have to understand, this woman's entire life has been based on digging holes to find this chest.
This one thing.
That is now not in her possession.
No.
Like, everything she is was based on this one chest, and now she cannot even open it because it's not for her.
Yeah.
And so she just doesn't even care anymore. So she just looks over and she goes, get me the file of Hector Zeroni.
And they're all like, we got rid of that shit.
Like, they're like, what do we do? And, like, Pendansky shows up and he's just like, there is no file. Like, looking very pleased with himself.
And so that's it. The sheriff's like, what kind of fucking operation are you running out here?
Yeah. And meanwhile, he notices Mr. Sir, and he's like, wait a second.
And he calls him Marion Sevilla.
Yeah.
And
so
because apparently I think he was like probably like a thief, or he had done illegal things and been arrested in the past.
Yeah.
But they said it was a violation of his parole for him to be carrying a weapon because he always has a handgun on him.
Yup. Yeah.
So they proceed to arrest Mr. Sir, obviously. And at the same time, they're like, we're launching a full-scale investigation. We're shutting this camp down. So you, Warden, are under arrest, and so's Pendansky, because he's also been pretending to be a doctor, which he's not. He has no medical license.
Right.
So all of that happens. And then, again, because this is like a shit show, literally the lawyer's like, yep, Zero's coming with us too. Come on, Hector, let's go. Yep. So they take the chest back to his family, who open it and are, pleased to find that there are jewels and gold and all kinds of stuff in there. And then they also find bonds from, what did they say, 1903?
1901, I think.
1901, 1903, something like that, that were at the time worth $25,000. So, I don't know, adjust for inflation,
like
guys.
Yeah.
They're worth like millions of dollars at this point. And so they're splitting everything with Hector, which in turn he's able to use to hire private investigators to track down his mom, because it turns out that she'd been trying to find him as well this entire fucking time.
It was very sweet.
It was very nice. So they're able to be reunited. They move in next door to each other, and the baseball player whose shoes had been stolen does like a collab with them for that for the foot odor
sploosh.
thing that they call sploosh.
Yeah.
And they make a commercial at the end. It's just like a very wholesome thing. But yeah, it's true that on a rewatch, I will say that like a lot of the deeper issues and stuff within the story are really like very well done for a younger audience, because it does a good job of pointing out kind of the disparity between classes and like what that means in the judicial system.
Agree. Yeah, I really enjoy this movie. I tend to watch it probably like once every 5 years or so, because it's just like the story's good. Yeah. Like, it's a really good story, and because you've got so many like different like crisscrossy stories happening in the background, like it's interesting.
No, it is.
And the acting is good. I love Sigourney Weaver in this one. Excuse me.
She's great in this. She's really good. She's great. John Voight, who plays Mr. Sir. I'm not like a huge fan of him most of the time, but he's hilarious in this movie. Really he's really funny. Yeah. That's it. All the kids are really good.
They are, yeah.
You know, like Shia LaBeouf plays Stanley. I'm not commenting on anything to do with him in like a personal way. I don't want to talk about it. It's a mess. If you want to know, look it up. But I'm not commenting on it now. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. No. But like all the kids are great. The parents are funny.
Oh yeah, Fonz is in it.
Yeah, Henry Winkler plays his dad. He's great. Like, you know, like all the kids are really fun. And like everybody, like, the cast was just really good, and I think the vibe of it was really good. And I hadn't realized until we were watching it, but it turns out that Louis Saker wrote the screenplay. Yeah. And it's true that, you know, what we were saying is like whenever the author is involved in a more major way, whether they've written the entire screenplay themselves or if they were properly involved in the process of the film or the show, whatever the case might be, it just tends to be that much better, you know? Like there just tends to be something better about it. It's just truer to the original story, which normally means that the story is better than it would have been otherwise.
Well, I mean, like, they're not going to make like a movie about a book that wasn't that great, right? And then if the author wrote the book to begin with and it was like something that really like, you know, that was really good, really appreciated, like the story was good, the characters were good, to have that same person like be involved in the screenplay and the adaptation itself, you're obviously going to get a lot of that same flavor.
That is true.
Right?
I mean, I'd have to contradict your idea that like they're not going to make a movie out of like a book that's not good. We've watched a lot of passion flicks, Shereen. That's not true, and you know it.
Okay, there is like a niche audience for crap, Megan.
We've watched all of the after movies.
We have watched. Okay, we are the niche audience for crap.
No, we're so terrible.
If you're looking for a reason why this whole side of things thrives, you're looking at them.
Yeah, we're part of the problem.
We are the problem.
We're
it's
not.
Me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me.
Yeah. I'm not the solution. That's for sure. Yeah, we're terrible because we're gonna keep doing it.
100%. We're stay tuned for what the fuck's coming out.
It ends with us.
When is that coming out?
This month that this episode comes out. Yeah, it's coming out.
So get ready for a bonus episode of us groaning and screaming about
It Ends With Us. It's gonna be great. But I love Blake Lively, and I love Justin Baldoni. So great.
Yeah.
Wait, fuck, you're the one who read the book. You hated it. So.
I hated it so much.
Oh, so, yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's not what we're talking about. We will be, but we're not doing it for now. So, so anyway, I want to know, you know, how many people, like, remember this movie and probably read this book when they were younger, too, because I'm sure a lot of people did. You guys can let us know about that over on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at FullyBookedCA, and you can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/book was way better. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.